Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Santa Monica Reads program. We are so thrilled today to have best-selling author Susan Orlean with us. Welcome. Before we get started with today's program, I just want to share a few things with you, just to give you a little overview of Santa Monica Reads. Basically, Santa Monica Reads provides an opportunity to engage, read, and discuss the same program or the same book at discussion groups and special programs. 2020 marks the 18th year of this community reading program, and it's one of the longest running of its kind in the United States. This year's featured title is The Library Book by Susan Orlean. And our Santa Monica Reads program is part of our summer reading program. You can sign up for that at smpl.beanstack.org. And summer reading is for all ages. You can earn points by reading and completing activities. For every 1,000 points, you'll be entered into a prize drawing to win a gift card. And I'm just going to try a little screen share to show you some more information. So hopefully you see a slide up on your screen, but our summer reading program runs now through September 7th, and you have the URL there, smpl.beanstack.org. You can also scan the QR code, and there's more information on our website as well. Okay, just a few logistics that I want to go over for today's program. Oh. Someone says they can't hear me. Can other people hear me? Can anyone maybe enter into the chat if they're able to hear me? So any participants that we have at today's program, you can contact the moderators through the chat. Let me see here. I just received another message. Okay, so I'm going to continue. I apologize, Nancy. It could be my audio. Hopefully other people can hear me. So we're going to go ahead and continue. Just a few logistics about today's program. We do have the participant video and audio disabled. So the focus of today's program will be a presentation, a conversation with Susan Orlean. However, at the end of the program, we'll have a question and answer portion. So you can enter your questions into the chat. We'll let you know when we're at that portion of the program. Also, I'll be including some recommended links towards the end of today's program, and we will be linking to a survey when the program ends. So please make sure to fill that out. It helps us to make Santa Monica Reads the best possible program it can be. I do want to also give you a shout out to our friends of the library. They have been long time supporters of this program, so we appreciate their continued funding and support. Without further ado, I would like to move on to the introductions. So we have, of course, Susan Orlean with us today. She's been a staff writer at The New Yorker since 1992. She is the author of 7 books, including Rin Tin Tin, Saturday Night, and The Orchid Thief. Orlean began her writing career as a journalist in Portland, Oregon, after receiving a literature and history degree at the University of Michigan. Despite her lack of experience and credentials, those are her words, Orlean got a job with the local alternative news weekly, crediting her abiding passion for storytelling and sentence making for the launch of her career. Her unique take on interesting topics has drawn the attention of Hollywood. The Orchid Thief was the basis for Spike Jonze's 2012 award-winning film adaptation. Additionally, her 1998 Women's Outside article on Maui surfer girls' life swell was the basis for the 2002 film Blue Crush. With the library book, Susan Orlean channeled her childhood passion for libraries into 5 years of research and writing to produce a fascinating account of the 1986 Los Angeles Central Library fire and cultural history of libraries. Orlean is set to adapt the book for an upcoming television project. She lives with her husband, son, and small menagerie of animals, and splits her time between Los Angeles and New York's Hudson Valley. We also have today with us two librarians from Los Angeles Public Library who will be interviewing Susan. So I'll just give a brief bio of our two librarians that we have with us. So Diane is the Principal Librarian Associate Director of the Exploration and Creativity Department for the Los Angeles Public Library. Diane has over 20 years librarian experience. Previous to her current position, Diane was the Senior Librarian for Children's Services and worked as the Early Literacy Specialist, Outreach and Bilingual Librarian for the Children's Literature Department. Diane currently oversees the following system-wide library initiatives: Summer at the Library, which includes all of the Reading Challenge programs, Summer Lunch, and Summer Author, Full Steam Ahead neighborhood science programming and cultural programming, including LA Made and the library's NEA Big Read. Glenn Creason has been the map librarian for the Los Angeles Public Library for the past 30 years and a reference librarian at in the history department since 1979. He was actually there at the time of the fire. He was a co-curator of the landmark map exhibit Los Angeles Unfolded in 2009, and in October 2010 he published the book Los Angeles in Maps for Rizzoli International. He was also a contributor to the anthology LA-titudes, published by Heyday Press in 2015. He has written about local history maps and popular culture for local publications, including the Downtown News, Mercator's World, The Public Historian, the International Map Collectors Journal, The Communicator, the Los Angeles Times, and Edible Ojai. He blogs weekly on maps for Los Angeles Magazine and is a contributor on research topics for the Huffington Post and LAist. He has been the recipient of the Bruckman Award and the David Cameron Award for raising awareness of Los Angeles history using maps. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'll make that brief. My name is Jennifer Boyce. I am a librarian at the Santa Monica Public Library. I've been with the library for a little over 8 years. I've been a librarian for a little over 13, and this is my second year coordinating the Santa Monica Reads program. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Susan and Diane and Glenn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those great introductions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess.
You know a lot.
What's that?
Len, I didn't realize you had that much published. I mean, I guess I knew. Susan, we're so happy to be able to speak with you again.
Yeah, I'm happy that we've managed to adapt for the current moment. I would have liked to have been there in person with everybody, but we're managing as best we can. So, and of course, it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to folks through libraries about this book in particular.
Well,
So,
I won.
Go ahead, Glenn.
I was going to say I won the coin flip, so I'm going to ask the first question. Unless you have
All
more
right.
to say, Diane.
No, you're number one. Go.
Well, the first question is really, you ran into the story of the library fire years after the event, and the question is, what was it about that story that made you think that you could turn it into a, 380-page book?
Well, that's always the trickiest part of diving into a project, which is the conviction that you have found a story that can sustain 350 pages. I had been thinking, before I learned about the fire, it had occurred to me one day that it would be interesting to write something about libraries. I've found it very satisfying often to write about places that seem very familiar, but that when I've given it a second thought, I realize I don't know very much about them. I was in a library one day and thought, this is exactly the kind of place that fits that particular genre of story, which is, I've been in libraries many, many times in my life, but I don't really know how they work. And the idea of writing about the sort of day-to-day goings on in a library struck me as really interesting. And I remember mentioning it to my publisher, who said, well, yeah, but what's the narrative? I mean, it sounds interesting, but are people really going to want to read 300 pages that just documents the life of a library? Now, I thought yes, but, your publisher ultimately has the final say on such a thing. But it was already in my mind that this was a rich subject, that I just didn't have the story to kind of give it a narrative drive. I had just moved to LA, and certainly you know this story. I had never been to the downtown library. And it was really in the first or second month that I was living in LA when I was asked to give, excuse me, to give a little luncheon talk to the friends, to the Library Foundation, which I did. And at the end of giving the talk, Ken Brecker, who's the head of the Library Foundation, said to me, have you seen the downtown library? And I said, no. And he said, well, I'd love to give you a tour as a thank you for giving this talk. And I thought, okay, that's great. I think I went maybe the next week and met him. And I walked into the library, and first of all, I was just completely smitten by the building itself, which I think is such a remarkable building. And I just thought, wow, this is an incredible place. As we were touring the library and he was telling me all about the history and about different people, I was kind of getting excited, thinking, I knew there's a great book to write about libraries. They're just so full of stories. We stopped in the fiction department, and he pulled a book off the shelf and took a deep kind of whiff of the book and said, you can still smell the smoke in some of them. And I had no idea what he meant. I said, did they used to let people smoke in the library? And he said, no, smoke from the fire. And I said, from what fire? And he said, from the big fire in '86, and it shut the library down, and it was, the library was shut for 7 years. And at that moment, I thought, this is a great story, because I said, well, who did it? What happened? Tell me everything. So I think it was the combination of the library being a place that I already felt had this rich, fascinating life that we civilians don't really know. We come into the library, get our books, and leave. We don't know the way the library functions, the history of the library, but the fact that there was this dramatic event that gave this story an arc and of course, my first question was, what happened? What happened to that? Who burned it? What is the story? And how did the library recover? So I was completely driven to learn the story of the fire and tell the story of the library in the course of exploring the fire. I have enough sort of blind confidence that when I think a story is great, and I thought this is a great story, I just think everyone's going to be interested in this. Even though it doesn't sound necessarily like everybody would be interested in it, but I just thought, oh my God, this is the best, amazing story. This is a great story. I mean, obviously, I have to tell this story. And I just was off and running. I started working on it literally the next day.
And I remember, Susan, when you did come, and I was lucky enough to be one of the people who gave you tours behind the scenes. So, and I know Glenn also. And we joked around how he's in chapter 14, right, Glenn? And I'm in chapter 19. Yep. I have like a sentence, but Glenn is like, has a lot of history with our library. So glad you got to spend so much time learning about it. Okay. The second question we have here is, what is your relationship with libraries personally?
I have a very emotional connection to libraries. And I think that without that emotional connection, the book would have been a very different book. For me, a lot of what triggered my urge to write about libraries was having a moment when I took my son to the library and was suddenly overwhelmed with all of the memories of going to the library with my mom. I really hadn't thought about those visits in decades. I mean, you know, this was not something that I kind of meditated on often, and I probably hadn't reflected on it in God knows how long. But taking my son and walking into the Studio City branch library, which for some reason reminded me exactly of the branch library that I went to growing up in Cleveland. They don't really look alike, but something about it just triggered this memory. And I was just overwhelmed with all of these really kind of precious memories. My mom took me to the library several times a week, and it was really a special, almost ritual that we would get in the car and drive to the library and talk about the books we were going to get, and then talk about what we got when we came home. And it was a very particular, very special experience. Remembering it and having it feel so emotional was also something that I wanted to explore with the book, because it struck me that that was a very interesting thing, that my memory of that visit was so emotional. I went lots of places with my mom, and I don't have the same emotional feeling about going to the dry cleaner, going to the grocery store. You know, I spent a lot of time with my mom, but something about those trips were so particularly special. And at that time, soon after I began working on the book, my mom was diagnosed with dementia, and it became part of the experience of writing the book was trying to capture those memories of this thing that we shared that was really so special, and also reflecting on the fact that libraries are a sort of permanent memory, whereas I was watching my mom lose her memory, and that contrast was very profound and really it was very much part of what motivated me as I was writing the book, and to explore all the feelings that I had about libraries. They were very wrapped up in family, in childhood, growing up in Ohio, all of those things really became kind of vivid for me.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to add that, and I was there the day of the fire, and I lived through all of that stuff. But I have to say, in reading this book, that I actually gained an understanding of it I never had. And I think that the chapter that describes the fire as it moves through the building is one of the most exciting. I mean, it's a real testament to your ability as a writer. Is breathtaking, just incredible. And also, yes, thank you. So, but anyway, the question is that I wonder if it when you started writing it, if the book started changing, because I know it's really like 4 books in one. But there's a mystery, there's history, and then there's this very emotional part of it. Did it change as you wrote it, or did it? I mean, the way you saw it in the beginning, did it turn out that way?
It definitely changed, and I think it's a good sign. I think if a book doesn't change while you're researching and reporting it, then you're doing something wrong. It should surprise you and change because of what you're learning. But when I began, I really thought, all right, I'm going to write about the fire. And I never thought that the fire alone could be the entire book. But, well, to tell you the truth, when I first started working on it, I assumed that Harry Peake, the one and only suspect in the fire, I assumed he was alive. So I thought, well, this will be a book where I'm going to spend a lot of time with Harry and try to figure out if he really did it or he didn't do it. And one of the first things I discovered was that he wasn't alive. And I had a moment of thinking, well, I don't know if I can do the book, because that was the book I thought I was doing, which was Harry's perspective on the fire versus the library's perspective on the fire. So that was, and I remember saying to my husband, oh my God, he's not alive, and I don't think I can do the book. And I had a moment of thinking, well, it's impossible. How can I do that book? Well, of course, that isn't the book I did. But then it became very interesting to me that he wasn't alive. And, there's a lot of reporting that you can do about, in a sense, he's now history. And the book had so much history because it felt to me that you couldn't understand this dramatic event of the fire without understanding the whole context. The context being the history of libraries in the world, the history of LA, the history of downtown LA, which was very, very significant in the issues around the fire. Harry's own personal history. I mean, all of these kind of concentric circles, which it seemed I never pictured the book that way. And suddenly I thought, well, I can't tell the story without giving you this context and then the bigger context. And I certainly didn't go into it thinking I would write extensively about Nazi book burning. That was something that, as I'm writing about the library burning, and I began thinking, why is this so upsetting? Why do we react to the idea of books burning with such a visceral, emotional kind of horror, as opposed to, I always said to people, if City Hall had burned, I don't think people would have felt the same sense of, oh my God, City Hall, but books burning, it's such a trigger for us. And that led me then to think I need to write about that. Why is the idea of books burning so disturbing, across humanity? So this was, I went from this single event, and then it became a matter of seeing all the ways, all the repercussions that made the event so dramatic. That wasn't, I didn't go into it imagining that. Writing extensively about Charles Lummis and his extraordinary life. And, all of this came as a surprise to me, which is why I think I enjoyed doing it so much. I also should add, because I think this is relevant, I was new to LA. This book for me also represented me getting to know the city that I was living in and learning its history and having context for downtown, for the library, for some of these people who became larger than life figures in the story of the library. It was a very good way to get to know the city, by the way. I highly recommend it if you move somewhere new. Just write a book about it, and you'll learn very quickly a lot about the city.
The next question has to do with the use of the card catalog entries. So I always laughed that the chapter 19, which I'm in a little bit of, it starts off with the complete idiot's guide to parenting a teenager. And I know both Susan and I have teenagers. So I just thought, what gave you that idea to use those card catalog entries for each chapter?
I wish I could zero in on, I remember where I was and when it was that this idea dawned on me, but I can't remember what triggered that brain synapse to fire. I had already written about half of the book, and I was about to begin a chapter, and I had just some urge to not just begin the chapter right away, but to have almost like a little preamble before the chapter began, and to cite some books that sort of related to what the chapter was about. And then I got very excited about it because I liked the idea that you would read the book a little bit like the way you visit a library, that you would browse through the catalog or the shelves till you got to the thing you were looking for. That as much as I could create in the book, that experience of browsing, which I think is so fundamental to the nature of being in a library, and I called my editor, and it was sort of the middle of the night, and I said, "Can I do this?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Can you kind of make it look like a card catalog? I mean, one of the cards in the way that we're going to cite the Dewey Decimal call number." And he said, yes, we can do anything. And then I spent the next several days picking the books for each chapter, which was incredibly fun. And, I wanted the books to give you a little bit of a hint of what the chapter was about. And all of the books I chose have some relevance to the chapter. Some are very obvious, some less obvious, but they were all chosen very deliberately.
Right. Well, I know when people come to Central and they have your book in hand, I usually will take them if I run into someone and they look lost, and I said, "There, have your book," and I say, the card catalog that start off each chapter. Let me take you to the elevators, the bun elevators, which I know you've been on, that have the original card catalogs that were in the drawers of Central Library's original card catalog. And kids today don't even really know what card catalogs look like. So they're fascinated when they're in those elevators, which go all the way down to lower level 4 where Glenn's at. Over to you, Glenn.
And I'll just say, to follow up on that, having ridden those elevators many times, and I began scribbling down. I mean, he clearly chose the cards very specifically. I mean, they're not random. So there was probably a way in which that had been percolating in my head. I think also there was an urge that I had to just give people some inkling of the vastness of what the library has. And, I would come up with a subject and just look in the catalog, and there was always a book there on the subject. So having this span, and I tried to choose books from a lot of different eras. Also, as part of this effort to say, look what the library has. It's extraordinary.
Yes.
Well, we still have the last card catalog in the library in the history and genealogy department, still functioning.
Really?
So, well, it's the genealogy, family history card file. So anyway, I want to make sure I get this question in because it's very librarian related, and it has to do with the pandemic and this disastrous effect on the economy, and especially at Santa Monica Public Library, where they're suffering budget cuts and even staff. They're losing staff. It's a sad situation. I just wonder what your feelings are about that.
Well, this has been very unusual because in the past, at times of crisis, libraries have been a sort of haven. And, when during the war, when the Porter Ranch, area had to be evacuated, the library was the haven for the community where people could go and use the Wi-Fi and get information. And I think this is really unusual that libraries are not only impacted as much as everyone, but probably more because of the very nature of the way a library functions with people sharing space. So I would say this is undoubtedly one of the more unusual and impactful events in terms of libraries. And I've been asked by a number of people, well, how are they going to adapt? How is it going to be possible for people to come back to libraries? And, it's impossible to imagine that won't be something that will happen. I also think, and I've maintained this all along, that libraries are the original co-working space, and I think when we get through this pandemic, there will be a lot of people who will be working from home. Increasingly, you have Facebook and Twitter and Google who have announced that any worker who wants to work from home going forward can do so. That's something that libraries, that's a an aspect of libraries that I think is only going to be re-embraced by people, which is it's a great place to work. It's quiet. They have fast Wi-Fi. It's a pleasant place. So I think as soon as we're able to resume gathering in public places, I don't think anyone's going to go, you know what, we did fine without libraries during the pandemic, so let's just not have them. I think that they will be reinvigorated. But it's the fact that places are cutting. I don't even understand it, except that tax revenues are down and the economy is kind of shattered. And I guess the libraries have always been on the front line of cuts, unfortunately. I hope this changes. I mean, I think we all hope it changes.
Definitely. And yeah, I agree. Somehow we've all kind of risen to the occasion. Santa Monica, Los Angeles, library systems pivoted to meet the needs of the citizens of the cities. And hopefully everyone sees that. Both Glenn, before we forget, both Glenn and I, Glenn has the original sweatshirt that said Save the Library that he can hold up, I think. And then we just had the anniversary, 2018, well, not just, it was 2018, but we had these t-shirts made that said the Central Library reopening 25th anniversary when we reopened in 1993. And the staff were all given these cute little teddy bears. And the question that I have to relate is there a favorite factoid about Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Library, or libraries in general, you uncovered in your research when you were writing the book?
I think my favorite factoid is that there are more libraries in the United States than there are McDonald's.
Yes.
And, you know, I love that on many levels, but I think that just realizing how much they're part of our social fabric was kind of thrilling. And it was also something where I thought, is that true? Really? But it's true. And I love it. I feel like we should all be very proud of that fact.
I am. I'm going to have to use that next time we give a tour to the kids at the library.
Right.
I have one question though that I want to squeeze in here before we run out of time. Hold on a second.
We've lost Glenn.
We lost Glenn. He'll be right back. And Glenn and I.
My phone was ringing. My phone was ringing, and it always could be my ex-wife, and so that's not a good thing. So. Anyway, Susan, both Diane and I were very got a kick out of your Twitter storm, and I think it made you even more popular than ever before.
Well, I have no comment. No comment. But it's, you know, these are challenging times.
Yes, but I always say, what, a writer who drinks? So.
Yeah, I think unfortunately that is not an oxymoron. I think that it's kind of a tradition in the profession, but
yeah,
only in the appropriate amounts at the appropriate times, except for every now and again. So yes. That's my response.
Well, we both, you're more of a hero to us than ever.
Yeah. You are.
I get the feeling that this has been an extraordinary time in human history, and I think we're all kind of at the end of our ropes. We've all been locked up with our families for a very long time, and I certainly didn't imagine that there would be as much of a response and an outpouring of, oh my God, I feel exactly the same way. And, it was actually pretty funny, especially given that it was, I was typing in the dark while in bed and not really paying a lot of attention.
Well,
I think we want to give time for the questions that might have come in to be answered. So, Santa Monica?
How do we do that?
I think Jennifer's.
Okay, thank you so much to Susan, Glenn, and Diane. That was a really engaging conversation. I do have a few questions in the chat. I want to encourage, we have 72 attendees currently, so I want to encourage anyone who is attending to post questions in the Q&A through the chat. But I'll go ahead and start by asking the ones that are there. So let's see here. Actually, I'm going to ask Glenn and Diane if you can keep your video on, but if you can just mute yourself so that I can see Susan. If she's talking, she'll be the bigger screen. Okay, so we have a question from Susan Annette. She's asking, in your book, you kind of addressed this a little bit already, but maybe you have something to add to it. In your book, you correctly identify the contemporary public library as a community center for people of all walks of life. With the impact of COVID-19 still playing out, how do you see the role of the library playing out in the future? So maybe, Susan, if you could just talk to a little bit more about what do you see the library's role moving forward?
I think that, as I said, I think that as soon as we're able to gather in groups, libraries are going to return to their very essential role as kind of community center, a place of, I just think of it as the hub of information and knowledge in a community. And I really do feel like this is such a strange thing for libraries to be shut down in the midst of everything being shut down. It's very rare. I mean, yes. I know a lot of libraries have said that this is the first time ever that they've been shut down. So normally the library is the place that stays open so that Correct. You have that place to go.
Right.
I think this is such an unusual moment in time. And my assumption is that as soon as we're able to gather and certain new protocols are figured out for having people in the library, they're going to open up and resume maybe even more vigorously than ever their place as that kind of center in the community. As I said, I don't think anyone's going to say, you know what, we didn't have libraries for 4 months, it was okay, let's just get rid of them. I don't think that at all. I think we're going to be hungry to have them return.
Thank you for that. Those are really great points, and I think libraries. I think the reason libraries have continued to sustain over time is that we have adapted to whatever changes are happening around us. But yeah, this is a very unusual time for sure. Next question is from Lulu. She says, Susan, what are you working on now? Does your editor or publisher ever turn down your book ideas?
Well, I'm working on a number of things right now. I am working on the television adaptation of the library book, which has
Very cool.
really been interesting. It's a whole new form of writing for me. I'm also working on a memoir, which is something that I've resisted for a long time and then decided I want to tell the story of the sort of backstory of the work that I've done, because there's a lot of interesting stuff that led to me doing a lot of the books and stories that I've written. So that's what I'm working on. I have to overcome a certain reluctance that I have to write about myself. And I keep saying to people, are you sure you really want to hear that much about me? And I'm so used to writing about other people that it's a little bit of a leap for me, but it's been pretty interesting.
Well, I'm looking forward to your memoir. I'll read it. We have a question from Robert. He says, or he's asking, I've heard that you've said this would be your last book. Is there truth in that? I guess you kind of addressed this in the last question, but is there truth in that, or do you always have possibilities percolating in your mind for whatever might be next? I guess the question is, you might have said that the library book was your last book. Now you're writing a memoir. Is it possible you'll write another book?
Yeah, well, actually, when I finished the book that I wrote before the library book, which was Rin Tin Tin, I really thought, that's it. I'm not going to write another book. I was really exhausted. It had taken me forever, and I just thought, you know what, I can't take on another project this big. It's just overwhelming. So I didn't really want to write the library book. I didn't want to write another book, but I couldn't resist. It just seemed like such a great idea for a book. And, you know, writing the memoir, as I said, was also something that I had a lot of reluctance around, except it's a very different kind of book. It's certainly different to not be talking to other people and not doing that kind of research. I feel like I became a writer because there are lots of things that I'm curious about. And even when I say I'm done, I'm not going to write anything else, then inevitably there's something I'm curious about. And I feel like I really want to find out about that. And next thing I know, I'm writing about it.
Right. Well, we're so grateful that you wrote the library book, and we hope that you'll continue to write.
Thank you.
We have a question from Olma. She's asking, do you have a favorite library you visited?
Gosh, I saw some amazing libraries. The Peabody Library in Baltimore is one of the most beautiful libraries I've ever seen. I walked in and my first thought was, I want to get married here. And they said, oh, we have weddings all the time, because it's just such a gorgeous piece of architecture. By contrast, I saw a library in Denmark, in Aarhus, very modern, very cutting edge, sort of the new imagining of what a library might be like. And it was really fantastic. You know, it's really created to encourage people to use the space. And I loved it. There's also another contemporary library in Calgary that is fabulous. And again, it's the same, it's really designed to be used and to be filled with people. And it's got a great, great feeling that I just loved. But I've seen some, you know, funky little libraries too that I've loved. So, you know, there's the architecture, which is one element of it, and then there's the feel of it. And you can have a very homely library that has a wonderful feel, and then a gorgeous piece of architecture that's a whole other kind of accomplishment. I think there's some really smart people designing contemporary libraries and making them really cool.
Right. Thank you. I'll just share that, so my parents are both big readers. They're actually attending the event today. They loved your book. And I'm originally from Seattle. When the Seattle Public Library system renovated many of their libraries, my dad actually took me on a library tour, which was very cool. So thank you for sharing about your favorite library. We have another question from Jennifer Paul Hammes. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. She's asking, can you give us examples of your daily or weekly research writing routine when you were working on this book?
Oh, that's a great question. I do all of my research before I do any writing. So I sometimes feel like I have two totally different jobs. One job is I leave the house, I'm down in the library interviewing people, I'm chasing leads about Harry Peak, I'm talking to firefighters about the fire, and it's a very external job. And I did research for this book for years and had not written a word because I wasn't ready. I didn't feel I knew the story yet. So that's a very scary feeling when your editor says, how's your book going? And you think, I don't have a word written, but I was doing all the research. When I finally felt that I had learned enough to begin writing, my routine changes completely. And it's all about sitting at a desk, at a computer, by myself, and I give myself a daily quota for how many words I want to write. I spend a lot of time going through my notes and transferring them onto index cards so that I can create a structure for the book. And then I'm just spending a lot of long days at the computer, and I try to write 1,000 words a day. There will inevitably be things that come up that I still have to find out. So that's typical, that you discover there's something you hadn't learned. But at that point, it's all kind of internal, being at home and writing, and trying to hit my 1,000-word quota every day.
Great, thank you. It's interesting to know more about your process. I'm sure it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
And then Marcy had a question. She's asking, what was something you found the library did/offered that you hadn't known about prior?
I think the thing that I was most surprised by was that that the library loans out orchestral scores and has this big department that, I mean, it was amazing to me to realize that, for one thing, a lot of small orchestras can't afford to buy the sheet music for whatever they're performing, and that the LA Library took over a very large music library and then also had a very big donation of a lot of musical scores. And it's a whole dedicated department for these orchestras and, you know, symphonies to borrow the music. And it was actually really, you know, it was one of those amazing things that it never had occurred to me that that would be something a library would have or do.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There is a question from Nina. She's asking, how were you able to organize all the research you did in order to write the book? For example, you have numerous interviews as well as other research facts.
This is the biggest challenge in writing a book, to be honest. When you have 5 years of research in all sorts of forms, including, in my case, I had all of these reports from the fire department, I had interviews, I had historical information. I just had so many different kinds of material. Just to get super nerdy, I mentioned index cards. I use these 5x8 index cards, and I transfer each unit of information onto an index card. And it's a very time-consuming, laborious process, but it gives me these units of information that I can then begin sort of moving around to figure out a structure for the book. If they remained in the form in which I had them, like a typed up interview or a fire investigation report, I wouldn't be able to kind of manipulate them to find a structure. So they all have to move onto these cards. And I don't remember exactly how many cards I had for this book. For my previous book, I had more than 700 cards.
Wow.
That's how I built the structure of the book. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, but managing information is really, it's a huge part of doing a book. Being able to put your hands on a detail that you found 4 years earlier. I mean, when you think about it, I was reporting for 5 years. There was a lot of stuff that I learned in the first year, and it was 5 years later, and I thought, where did I put that interview with that guy? And it's I'm sure a librarian could provide you with a great system for finding this information. A writer is kind of scrambling a little bit more, and so this process of these cards is one way to manage all the information.
That's really interesting. Thank you. We're just at 3:00 right now. There's a couple more questions. If people are able to stay on, we'll maybe just go like a few minutes over if you're okay with that, Susan.
Sure.
Okay? Are you good? Okay. So we have a question from Steve Whalen. He's asking, or he says, there's been an explosion of little free libraries around Southern California and beyond. Have you learned anything interesting about who is using them and how? I don't know if that's something you might know about, but...
No, I don't know a lot about them. I had intended to write about them when I was writing the book because they're an interesting phenomenon, and it never quite, there was never a way in which it really fit into the book. So I learned a little bit about them, but then didn't pursue it more because it was its own thing that wasn't quite related to the book. I think they're great. I think they seem to be really popular. I see more and more of them all the time, and it's more than anything, I think it's just such a nice gesture of sort of community spirit that I love them.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun for sure. We have a question from Jacqueline. She's asking, was Harry Peak's family happy with your book? Were you able to talk to them after the book was published?
That's a great question, and I tried to get in touch with them. Both his parents had passed away between the time that I began the book and when it came out. And both of his sisters, the phone numbers I had for them were no longer in service. And it's a very weird feeling because I certainly wanted to make sure they had copies of the book and to thank them for being helpful because they were helpful. I knew that they probably would have some misgivings about what I wrote, but I was willing to hear that. But it was very odd to never connect with them, and they never. I mean, they had my number, and they could have contacted me, but they never did.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I don't see any further. Well, actually, let me make sure I see. Oh, sorry, there's one more question. Okay, this will be our last question because we are just a little bit over time. So there's a question from Maria. She's asking, oh, I don't know if this is a question for you or for the library. I think it's a more of a question that has to do with kind of like a lot of people think of libraries as archives. Certainly, LAPL actually does have some archival collections, but she's asking, what is the suggestion about discarding old books and replacing with new books? Should old books be kept in storage? So I think her question is, what is, maybe you can comment a little bit about what is your concept of libraries? Should we keep everything? Should we be an archive? Should we be adding new materials, making space for new things?
One thing that I learned, or I should say that it had never occurred to me until I started working on the book, is that libraries just physically cannot keep everything. Otherwise, the minute you would build a library, all the space would be inadequate. I mean, there's so many books published every year, and it's simply impossible for libraries to be infinitely expanding. I mean, they just don't have the space for it. So a lot of the sort of kind of squeamishness that people have about weeding out material is just a matter of kind of practical reality, which is that libraries don't have endless amounts of space. How they should allocate that space is what we have librarians for, which is to make the determination about what is really important to keep and what is less important. I do think the potential to digitize a lot of stuff is going to make that a little bit less of a black and white question, because it'll be easier to keep more material in a digital form where space is less of a problem than when you've literally got books, piled up to the rafters,
right,
and nowhere to put them.
Right. Okay, I know I said that was the last question, but I see a question from a staff person, and he's actually the previous chair of Santa Monica Reads, so I want to make sure to include it. He's asking, he says, Santa Monica Reads is about recommending great books to others. What books would you like to recommend to us?
Oh, boy.
I know, it's like the what is your favorite book question. It's hard to choose one.
There's so many great books. I'll just do one suggestion. I read a lot of fiction in my own sort of personal reading time, and a book that I really enjoyed is called The Association of Small Bombs. And the author, I'm forgetting the name of the author, but it's a fantastic book. I could give you a list as long as my arm of great books. There's so many, and that was one that I read recently that I love.
Great, wonderful. Well, we're as I said, we're a little bit over time, so I do want to conclude the program. Just a few announcements before we do that. I want to thank the Friends of the Library for their ongoing support of Santa Monica Reads. I would like to just do a quick screen share of their site and mention that the best way that you can support the Santa Monica Public Library is by joining the Friends. So let me see if I can pull that up really quickly. I know Sometimes there are technical issues. Let's see if it works. Can you see my screen?
Oh,
Can you see my screen?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, if you go to friendsofsmpl.org, there's information about what the Friends of the Library do and how you can become connected with them. And as you know, we have had a pretty significant staffing reduction at the Santa Monica Library, so I'll just read this out loud. To the laid-off librarians of Santa Monica Library, you shared your knowledge, you challenged our thinking, you brought us together, your passion made a difference, and thank you. And the last thing I want to share with you is that there is a wonderful video, actually, that LAPL produced as part of the 25th anniversary of the fire. I'm gonna, well, I don't know, actually, I'm not gonna include the link in the chat. I'll just tell you the title. It's called Saving Central Library, Remembering the Fire and Recovery. Maybe I can just throw that into the chat there. But I highly recommend checking that out. There's some really great, let's see if I even know how to share that with you. I may not. Well, that's okay. Just Google it. There's some really great footage from the fire and with staff that were actually there at the time of the fire. I recommend checking that out if you have time. And when we conclude the program today, there will be a survey that launches automatically. So again, we encourage you to fill that out so that we can get feedback about how to make Santa Monica Reads the best program it can be. And any final, I see a few people have dropped off because we went a little bit over. Susan,
we're losing your audio.
Oh, apologies. Any final comments from Susan, Diane, or Glenn?
No. I just say thank you, and I'm delighted to have been able to be with you tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and for helping us to make this program possible. It's been months in the making, so we really appreciate you working with us to be able to host today's event. So thank you. Did you want to say anything, Diane or Glenn?
Just thanks for letting us participate with you. It was a pleasure, and thank you, Jen. Thanks, Santa Monica Public. Keep it going.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yay to all the LAPL staff who are working hard at the Libraries to Go.
Absolutely. And we've launched curbside service at Santa Monica, so you can come and get your books.
Well, some sunny day, hopefully we'll see Susan again across the reference desk. And you too, Jennifer.
Yes, maybe we can all go out for coffee.
We'll give you a tour of the map department.
There you go. I would love that. Okay, well, thank you so much to everyone attending today. Just for our presenters and for Susan, just to let you know, when I exit the event, it will shut down for all of us. So I'll follow up with you by email, but thank you so much. It was really lovely to have you here with us today.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.